They told me my position was being eliminated. A corporate restructuring. Those were the exact words Julian Vance used, his voice smooth and practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. He slid a piece of paper across the polished mahogany of the conference table. My termination notice. My name is Stephen Drake. I'm 47 years old. And for 24 years, I wasn't just an employee at Omnicore Financial. I was its central nervous system. I built the damn thing. Every server rack, every line of proprietary code, every security protocol that guarded the $890 million in client assets flowing through our systems every single day. Julian, the new chief technology officer, was 32. He had a Wharton MBA, a collection of Brioni suits, and a vocabulary comprised exclusively of buzzwords he'd learned in a seminar. He'd been at the company for 6 weeks. He looked at me from across the table, his expression a well-crafted mask of sympathetic regret. It was a poor fit. "We're moving in a new, more agile direction, Stephen," he said, steepling his fingers. "We appreciate your years of service, of course, but we need a team that can pivot toward a more dynamic, cloud-native paradigm." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. I looked at his perfect hair, his impossibly white teeth, the $20,000 Patek Philippe on his wrist. I saw a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. This child was now firing the man who built the house he was standing in. "Your replacement, Chad Morgan, starts Monday," Julian continued, oblivious. "He has extensive experience with synergistic workflow optimization from his time at Innovatech." Chad Morgan. I knew the name. Julian's old college roommate. His LinkedIn profile was a masterclass in empty jargon. I doubted he could configure a router, let alone manage the multi-layered security architecture I had spent 2 decades perfecting. I nodded slowly. My hands were steady on the table. Inside, a cold, quiet switch flipped. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. A perfect, crystalline understanding of the situation. I had given this company my life. I'd missed my daughter's first steps because of a server migration. I'd spent our 10th wedding anniversary on the phone with a data center in Virginia, talking them through a cooling failure. And this was the thanks. A 5-minute meeting and a 2-week severance package. "I understand," I said. My voice was even. I signed the paper. I stood up, took my company ID from my belt, and placed it on the table next to the termination letter. I did the same with my company phone and laptop. Julian looked relieved. He thought this was going to be difficult. He thought I would plead, or argue, or get angry. He had no idea this scene would not be remembered as his triumph. He gestured to the door, where a security guard was waiting. "Frank will escort you out." But here's what Julian Vance, with his expensive education and his powerful father on the board, didn't know. He thought he was taking control of the kingdom. He didn't realize that the keys he'd been given, the admin passwords, the server root access, were just copies. They were guest keys. The master keys, the ones that could decrypt the entire system. The ones that could restore it from a catastrophic failure. The ones that could, with a single command, turn $890 million of client data into useless digital garbage. Those keys were on a small, innocuous-looking key fob in my pocket, and only I knew they existed. If you like stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, where the people who do the actual work finally get the recognition they deserve, then hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. I put out new stories of corporate karma and sweet justice every week, and you're going to want to see how this one ends. 2 weeks before the humiliation, that's when Julian Vance arrived. He was the son of Lawrence Vance, a private equity shark who had bought a controlling interest in Omnicore a year prior. Julian was his father's emissary, installed as CTO to modernize the company. His first all-hands meeting was a disaster of epic proportions. He stood on stage in a headset microphone, pacing like a motivational speaker, talking about disrupting the legacy mindset and unlocking shareholder value through digital transformation. I sat in the back row and listened. I was 23 years old when I joined Omnicore. Back then, it was just Arthur Hayes, the founder, and two salespeople working out of a rented office above a dry cleaner. They had a brilliant idea for a financial transaction platform, but no idea how to build it. I had just finished 4 years in the Army's Signal Corps, specializing in secure communications. I was looking for a challenge. I built their first server myself, using parts I bought at a computer fair. I wrote the first version of the transaction software on a used Dell desktop in my apartment. For the next 24 years, I was the bedrock. When we grew to 50 employees, I built the internal network. When we signed our first major banking client, I designed the security architecture. When we hit 500 employees and moved into the gleaming downtown tower we now occupied, I oversaw the construction of our Tier 4 data center in the basement, a fortress of concrete and steel that I had designed from the blueprints up. The work was my life. My wife, Sarah, was a saint. She understood the late nights, the weekend calls. "You're building something, Stephen," she'd say. "That matters." My daughter, Emily, who was now 16, had grown up with the company as a constant presence in our lives. My sacrifices had provided them with a good life, a comfortable house in a quiet suburb, paid for with a mortgage of $2,800 a month, the promise of Emily's college education, fully funded, a retirement account built on stock options I'd been granted over 2 decades. It was all tied to Omnicore. Julian, in his speech, pointed to a slide with a stock photo of smiling, ethnically diverse millennials. "The old ways of doing things are an anchor," he declared. "We need to be lean. We need to be agile." He looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom, like me, had been there for over a decade. He didn't see experience. He saw overhead. He saw me as the biggest piece of overhead. In our first one-on-one, he looked at my title, Director of IT Infrastructure, and sneered. "It's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? A bit hardware-focused. Everything's in the cloud now, Stephen." I tried to explain. "Our system is a hybrid, Julian. We use cloud services for front-end applications, but our core transaction ledger and the client data vault are on-premise for security. It's an air-gapped, proprietary system. It's the reason we've passed every federal security audit with a perfect score for 12 years straight." He waved a dismissive hand. "Legacy thinking. It's inefficient. It doesn't scale. Chad, that's Chad Morgan. He's a genius. You'll love him. He says we can migrate the whole stack to AWS in 6 months. Cut our infrastructure costs by 40%. I knew that was a lie. A migration of that complexity and sensitivity would take at least 2 years and cost tens of millions of dollars. The security risks were astronomical. He wasn't talking about a plan. He was reciting a sales pitch. He didn't understand the system. He hadn't even read the architectural diagrams I'd provided. He saw a complex machine he didn't comprehend, and his only instinct was to replace it with something simple that came with a brochure. That's when I knew my time was limited, but I wasn't worried, because of Arthur Hayes. Back in 2013, we suffered a sophisticated hacking attempt from an Eastern European syndicate. They breached our outer firewalls, but they couldn't get near the client data vault. My layered security design held them off for 72 critical hours, while I worked with the FBI to trace and neutralize the attack. We came terrifyingly close to a disaster that would have destroyed the company. A week later, Arthur called me into his office. He was in his late 60s then, a wise, kind man who understood the difference between value and price. He poured 2 glasses of 18-year-old Macallan. "Stephen," he said, his voice grave, "we got lucky. You were brilliant, but we can't count on luck. The day will come when I'm not here. The day will come when this company is run by men who care more about quarterly earnings than about protecting our clients." He looked me dead in the eye. I want you to build something new, a final failsafe, a dead man's switch, something that only you and I know about. A master control that bypasses the standard admin privileges, not to be used for malice, but as the ultimate protection, an insurance policy against arrogance and stupidity. So we did. We spent the next 6 months designing and implementing a new encryption layer. It was a masterpiece of security, engineering. The system generated a set of standard administrative keys, which were stored in the company's digital vault and used for day-to-day operations. But it also generated a single, unbreakable master key. This master key was tied to a physical token, a small device that looked like a generic security fob. Without that token, the core data vault could be read, but it could not be fundamentally altered, restored, or decrypted on a system-wide level. Any attempt to do so would trigger a protective lockdown, rendering the data inaccessible until the master key was used to release it. The intellectual property for this encryption algorithm was unique. Arthur's idea. "We're not giving this to the company, Stephen," he'd said, not outright. We formed a small holding company, just the two of us, called AS Digital Security. We filed the patent under that company's name, Patent der 7-843-9912. Then, AS Digital Security granted Omnicore an exclusive, royalty-free license to use the technology. I still have the original contract, drafted by Arthur's personal lawyer. I remember the specific clause, Section 12B. The lawyer had called it the betrayal clause. It stated that the license was contingent on my continued employment as a senior technical director. If my employment was terminated without cause, the license would be rendered null and void 30 days after termination. Arthur had smiled when he saw it. A little something to make sure they never forget who built the place. Arthur Hayes passed away in 2019. His son, who had no interest in the business, sold his family's 51% stake to Lawrence Vance's private equity firm. And just like that, the company Arthur and I had built was in the hands of strangers. Strangers like Julian. The day I was fired, I went home. Sarah saw my face and knew immediately. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around me. I stood in our kitchen, the smell of roasting chicken filling the air, and held on to her. For the first time in 24 years, I had nowhere to be. No server to check. No alert to monitor. I was adrift. But that feeling lasted for about an hour. Then the training kicked in. The discipline from my Army days. You don't panic. You assess, you plan, you act. I went into my home office, a room I'd spent precious little time in over the years. I fired up my personal machine, a custom-built rig with a direct encrypted VPN connection to a monitoring node I had embedded deep within Omnicore's network years ago. It was a diagnostic tool designed to give me a god's-eye view of the system's health without having to log in through official channels. It was completely invisible to standard network scans. It was my periscope, and I began to watch. It didn't take long for the comedy of errors to begin. On Monday, Chad Morgan's first day, the log files started lighting up. 9:17 a.m. Chad, in an effort to declutter the interface, disabled the automated hourly integrity checks on the secondary databases. He marked the action in the system log with the comment, "Redundant process, removing to improve performance." My knuckles turned white. Those checks weren't redundant. They were the early warning system for data corruption. 1:42 p.m., Julian sent a company-wide email announcing his vision for a new tech era at Omnicore. It was full of meaningless graphics and promises of a frictionless user experience. While he was typing that email, Chad was struggling to grant a new sales executive access to the CRM. It was a simple permissions change that should have taken 30 seconds. It took him 4 hours and required him to reboot a non-essential server, causing a 15-minute slowdown for the entire sales team. I saved a copy of the log. The next day was even better. Julian, eager to make his mark, had purchased a new piece of marketing analytics software for $250,000. He wanted it integrated immediately. He hadn't consulted with any security team because he had fired the only person who could have told him it was a terrible idea. The software had known vulnerabilities. It was a backdoor waiting to be opened. Chad, following orders, attempted to integrate it. He bypassed 3 separate security warnings that I had programmed into the system. The warnings were explicit. Unauthorized API call. This integration violates Protocol 7 Gamma. Do not proceed without manual override from system architect. Chad typed override CM and hit enter. I watched the data packets flow. I saw the new software create a hole in our outer perimeter. It was like watching a fool install a screen door on a bank vault. I documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, command line entries. I was no longer just an unemployed IT guy. I was a forensic investigator building a case for gross, catastrophic negligence. For 2 weeks, I watched them dismantle my life's work, brick by brick. They were termites, chewing away at the foundations of a skyscraper, completely oblivious to the load-bearing walls. Minor outages became more frequent. Client portals would randomly go down for 10 minutes at a time. The overnight data settlement process, which I had fine-tuned to complete in 2 hours, was now taking 7 or 8 hours, bleeding into the next business day and causing reporting delays. Julian's response was to blame the aging infrastructure. He held meetings where he presented slides showing the technical debt he had inherited. He was positioning me as the scapegoat for the problems he himself was creating. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, 11 days after my termination. I was in my office, sipping coffee, when a series of high-priority alerts flooded my private monitoring channel. They were coming from the core data vault. The alerts were a code I had written myself, a digital scream for help. The system was detecting anomalous activity at its deepest level. I drilled down. Chad, under pressure from Julian to fix the damn slowdowns, had decided that the primary encryption on the live transaction database was the cause of the performance issues. This was like deciding the foundation of a house was too heavy and trying to remove it with a sledgehammer. He was attempting a live re-indexing of the main data tables. It was a procedure so dangerous, so delicate, that I had only performed it 3 times in 20 years, and always at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, with the entire system offline. Chad was doing it at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, with billions of dollars in transactions flying through the system. I watched, my heart a cold stone in my chest, as he issued the command. And I watched as my final failsafe, the one Arthur and I had designed, kicked in exactly as planned. The moment Chad's unauthorized command tried to alter the fundamental structure of the encrypted data, the master security protocol initiated. It didn't delete the data. It didn't corrupt it. It did something far more elegant. It re-encrypted the entire live vault with a new, one-time key, and then encrypted that key with the master key from my physical token. The data was still there, all $890 million of it, perfectly safe, perfectly preserved, and perfectly, completely, utterly inaccessible. On screens across Omnicore, and more importantly, on the screens of our biggest client, Sterling Mutual Bank, every piece of data turned to gibberish. Their automated trading systems, which connected to our platform every 5 seconds, started throwing critical failure errors. From their perspective, their data, representing $150 million of their assets, had vanished. The chaos was immediate. My phone, still connected to a few low-level engineers who hadn't deleted my number, started vibrating with panicked texts. System is down. Hard down. We can't access anything. WTF is happening? I ignored them. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of my coffee. The trap was sprung. Now, I just had to wait for the panicked animal to bleed out. The first call came from Sterling Mutual at 10:34 a.m., according to the incident report I later read. Their chief operating officer was on the line with Omnicore's CEO, a man named Robert Peterson. Peterson was a finance guy, a numbers man. He didn't know the first thing about technology, which is why he'd trusted Julian's slick presentation. The terms of the Sterling contract were brutal. A 99.99% uptime guarantee. For every hour of unscheduled downtime on their core data access, Omnicore owed them a penalty of $2.5 million. The clock was ticking. Peterson, in a full-blown panic, got Julian and Chad on a conference call. I could just imagine the scene. Julian, his tailored suit suddenly feeling tight around the collar, trying to explain the situation using his useless buzzwords. We're experiencing a temporary data desynchronization event due to a legacy architecture bottleneck. Chad, meanwhile, was probably staring at a screen full of encrypted nonsense, the color draining from his face as he realized he was out of his depth. They tried to restore from the backups, but of course, the backups were also encrypted. They could restore the files, but the data within them was gibberish without the key. They were locked out of their own house. By 3 p.m., the situation was catastrophic. The company's stock had dipped 12% based on rumors of a major system outage. 3 other large clients had reported access issues. Peterson had called an emergency board meeting for 4 p.m. Lawrence Vance, Julian's father, would be there. I spent the afternoon mowing my lawn. The clean, straight lines in the grass were satisfying. Order out of chaos. At 3:45 p.m., I went inside, showered, and put on a crisp button-down shirt. I sat down in my office chair, placed the small key fob on the desk in front of me, and waited. My phone rang at 4:17 p.m. It was an unlisted number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello? The voice on the other end was strained, tight with fury. It was Peterson. Stephen, it's Robert Peterson. I know, I said calmly. We have a situation here, a major one. Julian seems to think he's blaming some of your old infrastructure. He's wrong, I said simply. The infrastructure is performing exactly as designed. It detected a grossly unauthorized attempt to modify the core data vault, and it did its job. It protected the data. There was a pause. I could hear muffled shouting in the background. It sounded like Julian. Tell him the system is locked down, Robert. The data isn't gone. It's in a protective stasis. It's encrypted. Can you fix it? Peterson's voice was pleading. Sterling is threatening to pull their entire portfolio and sue us into oblivion. The board is about to have my head. I can, I said. Another pause. He was waiting for me to say more. I didn't. I let the silence stretch, thick and heavy. Every second that passed, the penalty clock was ticking, costing the company another $41,660. What do you want, Stephen? He finally asked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Put me on speakerphone with the board, I said. All of them, including Julian. There was a fumbling sound. Then the acoustics of the call changed. I was in the room with them. I could picture it perfectly. The long mahogany table, the leather chairs, the terrified faces. Good afternoon, gentlemen, I said, my voice clear and steady. I understand you're having some trouble with the security architecture. Julian's voice, high and panicked, burst through. You did this. This is sabotage. You have no right to be on this call. I cut him off, my tone turning to ice. Julian, be quiet. The adults are talking now. A shocked silence fell over the room. I had their complete attention. Let me be perfectly clear, I continued. Your new CTO, in an act of breathtaking incompetence, attempted to perform a high-risk procedure on a live database that he does not understand. My system did what it was built to do. It protected the data from an idiot. Right now, that data is secured behind an encryption layer that none of you have the key for. I do. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I could hear someone take a sharp breath. It might have been Lawrence Vance. The encryption algorithm and its master key system are the intellectual property of a private holding company, as per patent NR 7 143,912, I stated, reciting the number from memory. Omnicore was granted a license to use this technology. That license was contingent on my employment, as stipulated in Section 12B of my 1998 employment contract. When you terminated me without cause 2 weeks ago, you voided that license. Legally speaking, as of this moment, Omnicore is in breach of patent law. However, I added, my voice softening slightly, I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm prepared to help you out of this mess. Peterson's voice was hoarse. What are your terms, Stephen? This was the moment, the culmination of 24 years of loyalty and one final, perfect act of self-preservation. My terms are non-negotiable, I said. First, a new 5-year consulting contract for me, personally. The contract will pay me $450,000 per year, guaranteed. It will specify a maximum of 20 hours of work per week, on a schedule of my choosing. I will have final authority on all matters of technical architecture and security. I paused to let that sink in. Second, I will be granted 200,000 fully vested stock options in Omnicore, effective immediately. At today's depressed price, that's a nice discount for me. I heard a low groan. And third, I said, my voice dropping, the immediate, for-cause termination of Julian Vance and his associate, Chad Morgan, for gross negligence endangering the company's financial stability and reputation. They are to be escorted from the building immediately and are never to be employed by or affiliated with Omnicore in any capacity ever again. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of checkmate. It was the sound of a smug, arrogant child realizing the game was over and he had lost. Julian started babbling. This is extortion. Dad, you can't let him do this. We can't. His father's voice, a low growl I recognized from financial news shows, cut him off. Julian, shut your mouth. Then, addressing the room, Lawrence Vance said, give him what he wants. Peterson, make it happen. Now. Peterson didn't hesitate. Done, Stephen. It's done. I'll have legal draw up the paperwork immediately. Can you fix it? I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. Have the contract and the stock grant agreement waiting for me, and have security meet Mr. Vance and Mr. Morgan at their desks. I don't want to see their faces when I arrive. I hung up the phone. I picked up the small key fob from my desk, feeling its cool, solid weight in my hand. Then I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door. Not as an employee, not as a victim, but as the man who was about to save the company from itself. When I walked into the Omnicore lobby, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The receptionist, a young woman named Maria, who I had always been kind to, looked at me with wide, stunned eyes. She buzzed me through without a word. As I walked toward the executive elevators, I saw them, Julian and Chad, each flanked by a security guard. Julian was carrying a small cardboard box with a sad-looking desk plant and a framed photo. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held his gaze. In that moment, he finally understood. He hadn't fired an old piece of furniture. He had tried to throw away the master key, and it had locked him out forever. He looked away first. I took the elevator up to the 40th floor. Peterson met me at the doors, his face pale, a sheaf of papers in his trembling hand. Here, he said, thrusting them at me. The contract. The stock agreement. It's all there. I spent 10 minutes reading them, right there in the hallway. Everything was exactly as I had demanded. I pulled a pen from my pocket, my own pen, not one of theirs, and signed. All right, Robert, I said, handing him a copy. Let's go fix your problem. We walked into the main data center. It was my cathedral. Cool, clean air, the quiet hum of servers, the blinking green lights like 1,000 tiny heartbeats. It felt like coming home. I sat down at the master console, the one I had built with my own hands. The screen was a wall of red error messages. I plugged my key fob into a dedicated, unmarked USB port on the console. A single command prompt appeared on the screen, bypassing all the standard interfaces. I typed a 64-character alphanumeric string from memory, the master decryption key. Then I typed the command, execute restore protocol 7, and I hit enter. On the massive monitors lining the wall, the gibberish text began to resolve. Order from chaos. The red error messages turned to green OK statuses. The whole process took 90 seconds. At 5:22 p.m., a little over 6 hours after the crisis began, the system was fully operational. A cheer went up from the small group of engineers gathered at the door. Peterson looked like he was going to weep with relief. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. Thank you, Stephen. God, thank you. The aftermath was swift and total. Julian Vance was a pariah. His father couldn't save his reputation. The story of the hotshot MBA who was fired and replaced by the man he'd just terminated, all within 2 weeks, became a legend in the financial tech world. He was publicly humiliated, his career in tatters. A year later, I heard he was working as a junior project manager at a failing dot-com startup in Delaware, his Brioni suits replaced by ill-fitting khakis. Chad Morgan simply disappeared. His LinkedIn profile vanished. He fell off the face of the earth, a footnote to a disaster he had helped create. The board members who had silently watched Julian push me out were now my biggest fans. They treated me with a reverence, usually reserved for visiting royalty. Lawrence Vance called me personally the next day. He didn't apologize, men like him never do, but he did say, "You were right, Stephen. You built a hell of a system." It was the closest I'd get to an admission of his son's failure. My new life was everything my old life wasn't. I had control. I worked when I wanted, from where I wanted. I spent most of my time in my home office, monitoring the systems I had built, but the frantic 24/7 stress was gone. I hired and trained a small team of bright, young engineers, teaching them the right way to do things, instilling in them the same sense of duty and respect for the craft that Arthur had instilled in me. I made sure they were well paid and appreciated. The stock options, granted at the crisis low price, quadrupled in value over the next year as confidence in Omnicore's stability returned. My net worth soared past $8 million. We paid off the house. Emily's college fund became a trust fund. Sarah and I took a 3-week trip to Italy, something we had dreamed of for 20 years. I left my work phone at home. The best part, though, was the time. I was there for Emily's soccer games. I helped her with her calculus homework. I was present for family dinners, not just physically, but mentally. The constant low-level anxiety that had been my companion for 2 decades was gone, replaced by a quiet, deep-seated calm. Sometimes I think about Julian. I think about his arrogance, his belief that a fancy degree and a confident tone were substitutes for actual knowledge. He saw my 24 years of experience not as an asset, but as a liability. He learned the hard way that you can't just optimize competence. You can't synergize experience. Some things have to be built, slowly and carefully, over time. Value isn't what you declare in a meeting. It's not a slide in a PowerPoint deck. It's the silent, invisible work that keeps the whole thing from collapsing. It's the man who gets up at 3 a.m. to fix a problem nobody else even knows exists. They forgot that. They will never forget it again. In the end, they didn't just give me my job back. They gave me the company I had already built. And this time, they gave me the keys for good. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story of justice served. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought. I'll see you in the next one.